Karen Whitmore stood frozen in her designer silk pajamas, clutching her morning coffee so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Through her pristine kitchen window, she watched in absolute horror as 20-something college kids cannonballed into her meticulously maintained saltwater pool. The sound of their laughter mixed with thumping bass from speakers that definitely weren't hers created a cacophony that made her left eye twitch. "What in the actual?" she began, then caught herself. Karen Whitmore, president of the Willow Estates Homeowners Association for the past 8 years, did not use profanity. She took measured breaths, set down her coffee with deliberate precision, and marched toward her sliding glass door with the determination of a woman who had memorized every subsection of the HOA bylaws. The scene outside was even worse than it had appeared from the kitchen. Her beautiful travertine pool deck was littered with red Solo cups, and someone had dragged her expensive teak lounge chairs into a makeshift seating circle. A young man with bleached hair and board shorts was attempting to do a backflip off her diving board, the diving board she'd specifically had installed to regulation depth after 6 months of permit applications. "Excuse me?" Karen's voice cut through the music like a blade through silk. "Excuse me?" The music stopped with a comical scratch, as if someone had yanked the needle off a record player. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, ranging from amused to confused to slightly terrified. The bleach blonde boy dangled awkwardly from the diving board, apparently having abandoned his flip mid-execution. "Hi there," the voice came from her left, bright and cheerful, and absolutely infuriating. Karen turned to see a lanky young man, with sun-streaked hair and the kind of confident smile that probably got him out of parking tickets. He was sitting in her favorite lounge chair, the one she'd special ordered from. It'll add ripping pool water onto the custom cushions. "I'm Jake Henderson," he continued, as if he were hosting a perfectly normal pool party at his own home. "We're from next door. Thanks for letting us use your pool. Your neighbor said it would be cool." Karen's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. When it did, her voice had climbed approximately 3 octaves. "My neighbor said, what?" "Yeah, the tall guy with the beard. He said you were super chill about sharing pool space with the community." Jake's smile faltered slightly as he registered Karen's expression, which had progressed from shocked to homicidal. Right. The tall guy with the beard. Karen's mind immediately conjured an image of Marcus Chen, the 42-year-old software engineer who'd moved in 6 months ago with his teenage daughter and had been nothing but trouble since day one. He'd painted his front door navy blue without HOA approval. He'd planted wildflowers instead of the approved landscaping. And now, apparently, he'd given permission for strangers to use her pool. "Everyone out," Karen said, her voice deadly quiet. "Now, come on lady, don't be like that," called out a girl with pink hair, who was floating on Karen's custom pool, Float the Elegant Swan. She'd bought after seeing it in Architectural Digest. "We're not hurting anything. We'll clean up something." Inside, Karen snapped. Maybe it was the casual dismissal, or the way the girl's neon pink hair dye was probably bleeding into her saltwater system, or the fact that someone had stuck googly eyes on her swan float's head. But suddenly she was moving, stalking across the deck with purpose. I set out. Karen's voice echoed off the surrounding houses. "This is private property, and you are all trespassing. I'm calling the police." The mention of police had the desired effect. College kids began scrambling out of the pool like it had suddenly turned to acid. Wet feet slapped against travertine as they grabbed towels, speakers, and drinks in a chaotic exodus. "Whoa, okay. Jake held up his hands as he stood, water streaming from his board shorts onto Karen's Italian cushions. "We didn't know," Marcus said. "I don't care what Marcus said." Karen pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "He had no right to give you permission to use my pool." As the last of the uninvited guests fled through the side gate, her side gate, which she now realized they'd somehow opened without the code, Karen found herself alone on her deck, surrounded by the detritus of their invasion. Red cups bobbed in her pool like tiny buoys marking a shipwreck. Someone had left a pair of flip-flops next to her prize-winning rose bushes. She speed-dialed the non-emergency police line while surveying the damage. The officer who answered was polite but unhelpful. "Ma'am, if they've left the property and taken their belongings, there's not much we can do retroactively about trespassing. You might want to have a conversation with your neighbor about boundaries." Oh, she'd have a conversation with Marcus Chen. All right. Karen spent the next hour cleaning her pool deck and testing the water chemistry, muttering increasingly creative threats under her breath. By the time she'd fished the last Solo cup out of her skimmer, she'd worked herself into the kind of righteous fury that had made her legendary among HOA presidents statewide. She changed into her most professional outfit, a cream-colored pantsuit that said, "I mean business," and marched next door. Marcus's house was everything Karen despised about the new generation of homeowners. The Navy door violation number 1 was flanked by planters full of wildflowers violation number 2 and native grasses violation number 3. His mailbox was slightly askew, violation number 4. And there was a skateboard leaning against the porch railing. Violation number 5, recreational equipment visible from the street closing parenthesis. Karen rang the doorbell with the persistence of a woodpecker. "Karen," Marcus opened the door, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a t-shirt that read "World's Okayest Dad." His expression shifted from confusion to resignation as he took in her formal attire and clenched jaw. "What can I do for you?" "You can explain," Karen said, pushing past him into his foyer. "Why you gave a bunch of strangers permission to use my pool?" Marcus's living room was an assault on Karen's sensibilities. Mismatched furniture, books stacked on every surface, and what appeared to be a half-finished Lego Death Star on the coffee table. A teenage girl with Marcus's dark hair was sprawled on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees. "Dad." The girl looked up with the particular brand of wariness teenagers reserved for adults in crisis mode. "Everything okay?" "It's fine. Lily, this is our neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore." Marcus gestured vaguely in Karen's direction. "Karen, this is my daughter." "It's Ms. Whitmore," Karen corrected automatically, then focused her laser glare back on Marcus. "The pool, explain." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of blue paint. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Jake asked if he could use the community pool, and I told him to check with the HOA president about community resources. "I had no idea he meant your personal pool." Karen stared at him. "You told him to check with the HOA president?" "Yeah, I figured you'd have the information about shared amenities and—" Marcus stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned. Oh no. He thought you'd already given permission. He said you told him I was super chill about sharing pool space with the community." Karen's voice dripped with disdain at the phrase super chill. "I definitely didn't say that." Marcus looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm really sorry, Karen. It was a miscommunication. I'll talk to Jake and make sure it doesn't happen again." It was a reasonable response. A normal person might have accepted the apology and moved on. But Karen Whitmore was not a normal person. She was a woman who had built her entire identity around maintaining order in a chaotic world, and her pool was sacred ground. "This isn't just about today," she said, pulling out her phone and opening her notes app. "This is about a pattern of behavior. Your door color, your landscaping, your visible recreational equipment." "Wait, what?" Lily looked up from her laptop. "You're upset about our door color. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all exterior paint colors must be approved prior to application," Karen recited. "Earth tones only. Navy blue is not an earth tone. It's the color of the ocean," Lily said. "The ocean is part of the earth." Marcus made a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Are you finding this amusing, Mr. Chen?" "No, I'm finding it ridiculous," Marcus said, his apologetic tone evaporating. "Look, I said I was sorry about the pool thing, and I meant it, but I'm not painting my door beige just because you have strong opinions about color wheels." Karen felt that familiar sensation of control slipping away. It was the same feeling she'd had during her divorce when Richard had laughed at her carefully organized calendar of custody arrangements. The same feeling she'd had at her old job when her suggestions for improving efficiency were dismissed as micromanaging. "The rules exist for a reason," she said, her voice tight. "Property values, community standards. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, the world might be a more interesting place." Lily suggested. Karen turned the full force of her attention on the teenager. "Young lady, when you own property and pay HOA fees, then you can have an opinion about community standards." "Okay, that's enough." Marcus stepped between Karen and his daughter. "I think you should leave." The dismissal hit Karen like a physical blow. She was used to being the one who ended conversations, who had the final word, who maintained control of every situation. "Fine," she said, straightening her jacket. "But this isn't over." The HOA board Thursday evening arrived with the inevitability of Karen's perfectly timed sprinkler system. She'd spent 3 days preparing for the HOA board meeting with the thoroughness usually reserved for military campaigns. Color-coded folders, printed violation photographs, and a 17-slide PowerPoint presentation titled Maintaining Community Standards, a case study in preventive enforcement. The meeting was held in the community center's beige conference room, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look vaguely ill. Karen arrived 30 minutes early, arranging materials with surgical precision while mentally rehearsing her opening statement. The other board members trickled in right at 7 o'clock, which irritated Karen on principle. Patricia Henley, the secretary, brought store-bought cookies instead of homemade ones. Bob Martinez, the treasurer, was wearing cargo shorts to an official meeting, and Frank Davidson, their newest member, had the audacity to show up with coffee from Starbucks instead of the approved meeting refreshments. "Evening, Karen," Patricia said, settling into her usual chair with a sigh that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "I brought Snickerdoodle store-bought," Karen observed, making a note in her meeting planner. "From the good bakery," Patricia defended. "The one with the organic flour." Frank Davidson chuckled as he opened his laptop. "Karen, you know it's a neighborhood HOA meeting, not a Senate hearing, right?" At 68, Frank was retired from some vague corporate job that had apparently given him the impression that everything was less serious than Karen believed it to be. He'd moved to Willowbrook Estates 6 months ago and had been questioning Karen's methods ever since. "All HOA meetings are serious," Karen replied, pulling up her presentation. Community standards don't maintain themselves. Bob Martinez squinted at the projector screen as Karen's title slide appeared. 17 slides. Karen, we've got 3 other agenda items tonight. This is the most important item. Karen clicked to her first slide, a photo of Marcus's navy blue door, taken from multiple angles with professional lighting. We have a resident who's systematically violating multiple community standards, and it needs to be addressed before it becomes a neighborhood-wide problem. Patricia peered at the photo over her reading glasses. That's Marcus Chen's house, right? The software guy, with the cute daughter? The same Marcus Chen who gave unauthorized permission for strangers to use my pool, Karen said, advancing to her next slide. This is about more than door color. This is about respect for community agreements. Frank leaned back in his chair. Okay, walk me through this pool situation again. Because from what I heard, it was just a miscommunication. Karen's jaw tightened. She'd prepared for this question. A miscommunication that resulted in 20 strangers trespassing on private property, using my pool without permission, and leaving debris in my water filtration system. The cost of rebalancing the chemicals alone was $47. Did you ask Marcus to reimburse you? Bob asked. That's not the point. Karen clicked through slides showing Marcus's wildflower garden, his askew mailbox, Lily's skateboard. The point is that when residents disregard community standards in small ways, it leads to bigger violations. It's the broken windows theory. Applied to suburban governance, Patricia looked confused. Broken windows. If you ignore minor infractions, they escalate into major problems, Karen explained. Marcus Chen's door color today, property value degradation tomorrow. Frank made a skeptical noise. Karen, do you really think a navy blue door is going to crash the housing market? I think consistency matters, Karen snapped. I think when we let one person ignore the rules, everyone starts thinking the rules don't apply to them. I think she was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Patricia glanced at her watch. We're not expecting anyone. The door opened to reveal Marcus Chen, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that looked like he'd borrowed it from someone more formal. Behind him stood a woman Karen didn't recognize mid-40s professional attire, carrying a leather portfolio that screamed expensive lawyer. Sorry to interrupt, Marcus said. I'm Marcus Chen, and this is my attorney, Rachel Morrison. I understand there are some concerns about my property that are being discussed tonight. Karen felt the familiar sensation of losing control of a situation. This is a closed board meeting. Residents aren't invited unless they're on the agenda. Actually, Rachel Morrison said, stepping forward with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Under the state's community association laws, residents have the right to address the board about any violations being levied against their property. I believe you've scheduled discussion of my client's alleged infractions. Frank Davidson was grinning openly now. Well, this just got interesting. Come on in, you two. Karen was just showing us pictures of your door. As Marcus and his lawyer settled into chairs, Karen felt her carefully planned presentation slipping away. She'd prepared to present evidence to a sympathetic board, not to defend her position against a software engineer and his legal representation. Ms. Morrison, she began, trying to regain authority, this is a preliminary discussion about community standards based on formal violation notices you delivered to my client's home. Rachel interrupted, pulling documents from her portfolio. I have copies right here. 5 separate violations, each carrying potential fines of up to $500. That seems more than preliminary. Bob Martinez whistled low. 500 each. Karen, when did we vote on those penalty amounts? The penalties are outlined in Section 12 of the Community Bylaws, Karen said, though she could feel sweat gathering under her arms. They've been in place for years. The penalties were established for major violations, Frank said, flipping through his copy of the bylaws. Things like structural modifications without approval, not mailbox alignment. Rachel Morrison smiled. That's interesting, because according to my research, the average fine for similar violations in comparable communities is $50, not $500, and most communities require a warning period before any financial penalties. We don't have time for warnings when property values are at stake, Karen said. Property values. Marcus spoke for the first time since sitting down. Can you show me the data on how my door color has affected property values in this neighborhood? Karen clicked to a slide titled Comparable Market Analysis. Neighborhoods with strict aesthetic standards maintain higher property values over time. That's a general statement, Marcus said. Do you have specific data showing that my door has lowered anyone's property value? Karen stared at the slide she'd spent hours creating. The truth was, she didn't have specific data. She had principles, standards, and a deep conviction that order mattered. But she didn't have numbers showing that navy blue doors caused financial harm. The damage isn't always immediately quantifiable, she said. Community standards work as a system. When one element breaks down, the whole system collapses, Marcus finished. Like the broken windows theory you mentioned. Karen was surprised he'd been listening from outside the door. Exactly. Interesting theory, Rachel Morrison said. Of course, it was originally developed for urban crime prevention, not suburban homeowner associations. And recent studies have shown that aggressive enforcement of minor violations can actually increase community tension and reduce overall satisfaction. Patricia Henley looked fascinated. Really? Where did you read that? Journal of Community Management, last month's issue, Rachel said. I can email you the link if you're interested. Karen watched helplessly as her board members began chatting with Marcus and his lawyer about community management theory. Frank Davidson was actually taking notes. The point is, Karen said loudly, trying to regain control, we have rules for a reason. If we don't enforce them consistently, then maybe we should examine whether the rules make sense. Marcus interrupted. My door color hurts no one. My wildflowers actually support local bee populations, which benefits everyone's gardens. My daughter's skateboard is stored neatly on private property. Your mailbox is 3 degrees off vertical alignment, Karen said triumphantly, as if this would settle the argument. Marcus stared at her. 3 degrees? The standard clearly states that mailboxes should be vertically aligned. Marcus finished. It doesn't specify tolerance levels. 3 degrees is within any reasonable interpretation of vertical. Bob Martinez was looking through the violation, photos with increasing amusement. Karen, did you measure this with a protractor? I used a digital level app, Karen said defensively. Precision matters. Frank Davidson burst into laughter. You measured a mailbox with a phone app? Karen, I've got to ask, do you have anything better to do with your time? The question hit Karen like a slap. Of course, she had things to do. She had a full-time job in compliance management for a medical device company. She had her weekly yoga class, her book club, her volunteer work with the animal shelter. She had a life, didn't she? Community management is a serious responsibility, she said stiffly. If that's amusing to you, perhaps you should reconsider your position on this board. Maybe I should, Frank said, his laughter fading. Maybe we all should reconsider what we're actually trying to accomplish here. Rachel Morrison leaned forward. That's an excellent point. What is the HOA trying to act? Karen woke Friday morning with the kind of determined fury that comes from a sleepless night spent planning revenge. She'd abandoned her usual morning routine of yoga and meditation in favor of coffee and internet research, diving deep into community, association law, property maintenance codes, and anything else that might give her ammunition in her battle with Marcus Chendot by 7 a.m. She'd discovered something interesting. While the HOA board had voted to table the violations, they hadn't voted to suspend her authority as president. Technically, she could still issue new violations for new infractions. She just had to be more strategic about it. Karen dressed in her sharpest business attire and made herself a second cup of coffee. Through her kitchen window, she could see Marcus's house in the morning light, and noticed something she'd missed before. His garage door was slightly dented, probably from where his daughter had hit it with that skateboard. Property damage that was more serious than aesthetic violations. She was taking photos of the garage door with her phone's zoom function when her doorbell rang. Karen checked the time, 7:23 a.m. Who rang doorbells before 8 a.m.? Through the peephole, she saw Patricia Henley holding a coffee tray and wearing the expression of someone preparing to have a difficult conversation. Morning, Karen, Patricia said when the door opened. I brought lattes, the good kind, from that place downtown. Karen eyed the piece, offering suspiciously, it's 7:30 in the morning. Patricia, I know. I couldn't sleep after last night. Can I come in? Against her better judgment, Karen let her friend inside. They'd known each other for 12 years, ever since Patricia moved to Willowbrook Estates after her divorce. They'd served on the HOA board together, organized community events together, even vacationed together once to a spa in Sedona, where Patricia had insisted they try couples massage with strangers, which had been deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved. Karen, Patricia began, settling onto the living room couch with her latte, we need to talk about what happened last night. What happened last night was that our board voted to undermine community standards because they're more interested in being popular than being effective. Patricia sighed. That's not what happened, and you know it. We voted to review policies that might be overly harsh. There's a difference. Karen sat down across from her friend, noting that Patricia had chosen the chair instead of sitting beside her on the couch. Physical distance to match the growing emotional distance, probably. Since when is maintaining property values overly harsh? Karen asked. Since we started fining people for mailboxes being 3 degrees off vertical, Patricia said gently. Karen, honey, you measured a mailbox with a phone app. You charged a neighbor $47 for pool chemicals because college kids made a mistake. You told a teenage girl she should move if she doesn't like HOA rules. Karen bristled. I did not say she should move. I said maybe she'd be happier in a community without standards, which is essentially the same thing. Patricia leaned forward. Karen, I'm worried about you. Worried about me? You've been getting more and more intense about HOA stuff. Remember last month when you called the police about Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes? The noise ordinance clearly states they were barely audible. And she's 83 years old. Karen. Those wind chimes were a gift from her late husband. Karen felt defensive heat rising in her chest. Rules don't have age exemptions. Maybe they should have compassion exemptions, Patricia said quietly. The two women sat in silence for a moment, sipping their lattes. Karen noticed that Patricia had gotten her order right: extra shot, oat milk, sugar-free vanilla. After 12 years of friendship, some things were automatic. Look, Patricia continued, I know you've been under a lot of stress since the divorce finalized, and I know this HOA president thing is important to you, but maybe it's becoming too important. Karen's phone, sitting on the coffee table between them, buzzed with a notification. Both women glanced at it automatically. The screen showed a preview of an email from the city code enforcement office. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Did you report, Marcus, to the city? Karen's silence was answer enough. Karen, you can't weaponize municipal services because you're mad about an HOA vote. I reported legitimate code violations, Karen said defensively. The garage door damage, the height of his fence, the placement of his trash cans. These are city ordinances, not HOA rules. Patricia stared at her. The placement of his trash cans? They're supposed to be stored out of public view between collection days. His are visible from the street by like 6 inches. Karen shrugged. A violation is a violation. Patricia set down her latte with enough force to slosh foam onto Karen's glass coffee table. This is insane. You're being insane. The word hit Karen like a physical blow. In her marriage, Richard had used insane to dismiss her concerns about his spending, her requests for more structure in their lives, her entirely reasonable desire to plan their future together. Hearing it from Patricia felt like a betrayal. I'm being thorough, Karen said coldly. You're being vindictive. Patricia stood up, clearly done with the conversation. And you're going to push away everyone who cares about you if you keep this up. After Patricia left, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring at the coffee ring stain on her table. She'd have to use wood cleaner to get it out, maybe refinish the whole surface to make it match. The thought of having mismatched furniture made her physically uncomfortable. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Willowbrook City Services, Ms. Whitmore. This is Janet from Code Enforcement. We received your complaint about 1247 Maple Street, but I wanted to clarify a few things before we send an inspector out. Karen straightened. What kind of clarification? Well, you've reported several violations for the same property in the past month. A fence height issue that turned out to be within code. A landscaping complaint that wasn't actually a violation. And now trash can placement and garage door damage. I'm wondering if there might be a neighbor dispute we should be aware of. The question caught Karen off guard. I don't understand. Sometimes we get called into disputes between neighbors, and it's helpful to know the context. Are you having ongoing issues with this resident? Karen felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm simply reporting code violations as they occur. I see. Well, I'll send someone out to look at the garage door and trash cans. But I should mention that we typically recommend neighbors try to resolve minor issues directly before involving city services. After hanging up, Karen realized she'd been branded as that neighbor, the one who called the city over petty disputes. The knowledge should have embarrassed her, but instead it made her more determined. If people thought she was petty, fine. At least she was effective. She spent the next hour documenting every possible violation she could observe from her window. Marcus's newspaper was delivered to the end of his driveway instead of his porch. Potential litter if it blew away. His daughter had left a water bottle on the front steps, debris visible from the street. The timing of his automatic sprinklers might be during prohibited hours. By mid-morning, Karen had compiled a list of 14 potential code violations, ranging from the legitimately concerning the garage door dent to the arguably petty small oil stain on his driveway. She was preparing to call the city again when her doorbell rang. This time it was Marcus Chen, and he did not look happy. We need to talk, he said without preamble. When Karen opened the door, Karen straightened, her shoulders. If this is about the code enforcement visit, I was simply reporting legitimate violations. Cut the crap, Karen. Marcus's voice was controlled but clearly angry. A city inspector just spent 2 hours at my house measuring garbage can placement and photographing a tiny dent in my garage door. He told me you've called about my property 5 times in 3 weeks. I'm an observant neighbor. You're a stalker. The word hung in the air between them. Karen felt her face flush. How dare you? How dare I? What? Point out that you're watching my house with binoculars, taking pictures of my property without permission, calling government agencies to harass me because you're mad about an HOA meeting. I do not use binoculars, Karen said stiffly, though she'd certainly considered buying some. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it, right? You just happened to notice that my trash cans are 6 inches too far forward from your kitchen window, 50 yards away. I have excellent eyesight. You have excellent crazy, Marcus shot back, and I'm done with it. He pulled a folded document from his back pocket. This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. You're to stop photographing my property, stop filing frivolous complaints with city services, and stop harassing my family. Karen took the letter with trembling hands. The legal letterhead looked official and threatening. This is ridiculous. I'm simply what? Simply trying to make my life miserable because your board didn't vote the way you wanted. Marcus stepped closer, and Karen instinctively stepped back. Let me be very clear about something, Karen. I moved here for my daughter. She's been through enough with the divorce and the move, and I will not let you make her feel unwelcome in her own neighborhood. I never said anything to your daughter. You told her she should move if she doesn't like the rules. To a 16-year-old girl who's already dealing with her parents' divorce and a new SC, Karen's campaign of neighborhood-wide enforcement began at exactly 8 a.m. Monday morning with the systematic delivery of violation notices to 22 households. She'd spent Sunday evening printing each notice on official HOA letterhead, complete with photographic evidence and relevant bylaw citations. The efficiency of it all gave her a deep sense of satisfaction. She started with the farthest houses and worked her way back toward home, savoring each confused and indignant expression as neighbors opened their doors to find formal complaints about their holiday decorations, garden choices, or recreational equipment placement. Mrs. Patterson, the 83-year-old widow with the wind chimes, actually started crying when Karen explained that the noise ordinance applied to all residents regardless of age or sentimental value of the offending items. But they were Harold's favorite, Mrs. Patterson whispered, clutching her walker. He hung them there before he died. I'm sure Mr. Patterson was a lovely man, Karen replied, maintaining professional distance. But the rules are quite clear about noise-generating decorative items. By the time Karen reached the Johnsons' house, a young family with twin toddlers had apparently spread through the neighborhood's group text chain. Janet Johnson answered the door with her phone already recording. Let me guess, Janet said, bouncing a fussing baby on her hip while her husband corralled their other toddler in the background. You have a problem with our basketball hoop? The Recreational Equipment Storage Ordinance states that all sporting goods must be stored out of public view, Karen recited, holding up her violation notice. It's a basketball hoop, Janet said incredulously. For children, our children who live here. The location doesn't comply with community standards. The location is our driveway, Karen. Where else would we put a basketball hoop? Perhaps a community that better suits your recreational needs, Karen suggested, unconsciously echoing what she'd said to Marcus's daughter. Janet's expression hardened. Are you seriously suggesting we move because our kids like to play basketball? I'm suggesting you follow the same rules everyone else follows. What rules? Show me one other household in this neighborhood that's gotten a violation notice for a basketball hoop. Karen smiled tightly. Check with your neighbors. I think you'll find that community-wide enforcement is now in effect. By noon, phone was ringing constantly. The Garcias called about their garden gnomes. The Williamses wanted to discuss their hedge trimming timeline. The Patels had questions about their seasonal doormat, which apparently violated the approved outdoor decorations policy. Each call was a small victory. Finally, people were taking community standards seriously. Finally, they understood that rules applied to everyone equally. Her satisfaction lasted until 2 p.m., when Patricia called with barely controlled fury. Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing? I'm enforcing community standards equitably across all residents, Karen replied, settling into her home office chair with a cup of tea. You gave Mrs. Patterson a violation notice for wind chimes. She's 83 years old, Karen. Those chimes are all she has left of her husband. The noise ordinance doesn't have age exemptions. The noise ordinance was written for loud parties, not memorial wind chimes that you can barely hear from the street. Karen pulled up her documentation on her computer. Actually, if you read Section 14 subsection C, it clearly states that any noise-generating device, I don't care what it states. Patricia's voice was shaking. I just spent an hour with that sweet old woman while she cried about having to take down the last gift her husband ever gave her, because you're having a tantrum about Marcus Chen's door color. This has nothing to do with Marcus Chen, Karen lied smoothly. This is about consistent application of community standards. Bullshit, Karen. Complete bullshit, and you know it. Patricia hung up without saying goodbye. Karen stared at her phone for a moment, then made a note to review Patricia's property for violations. She'd noticed some overgrown ivy on the back fence that might constitute a maintenance issue. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors to Karen's door, each more upset than the last. Bob Martinez showed up around 3 p.m., waving his violation notice about his garage door being left open during non-approved hours. Karen, this is insane. I was unloading groceries for 15 minutes. The garage storage ordinance is quite clear about extended periods of public visibility. 15 minutes, Karen. I had ice cream melting. Frank Davidson arrived an hour later, his violation notice crumpled in his fist. Basketball hoops. Karen, you're going after kids' basketball hoops? Community standards apply to all residents equally. What community standards? When did we vote to ban children's recreational equipment? Karen pulled out her tablet and showed him the relevant bylaw. Recreational equipment storage has been regulated since 2018. That was about boats and RVs and driveways, not kids' toys. The language doesn't specify size restrictions for recreational equipment. Frank stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're interpreting a boat storage rule to ban basketball hoops. I'm applying the bylaws as written. You're applying the bylaws like a robot with a personality disorder. After Frank left, Karen made another note about potential violations. His garage contained visible storage that might not comply with the neat and orderly standards outlined in Section 8. The evening brought her greatest triumph, and, though she didn't realize it at the time, the beginning of her downfall. At 6 p.m., her doorbell rang to reveal Marcus Chen and his daughter Lily. Marcus looked exhausted, but Lily was practically bouncing with energy. "Let me guess," Marcus said. "Wearily, you found some new violations at our house." "Actually, no," Karen replied, which seemed to surprise him. "Your property remains within the scope of the cease and desist letter." "Oh," Marcus said. "Then what's this about?" Karen smiled. "This is about your daughter's activities this afternoon." She pulled out her phone and showed them a series of photos. Lily Chen walking through the neighborhood with a clipboard, talking to various residents, taking pictures of properties. "Lily has been conducting her own inspection of community standards," Karen continued, "which raises some interesting questions about harassment and trespassing." Lily grinned. "Actually, it raises some interesting questions about public records and freedom of information." She pulled out her own phone and began scrolling through photos. "Did you know that your fence is 6 inches higher than the maximum allowed by city code? Or that you're operating a home business without proper permits?" Karen's smile faltered. "I don't operate a home business. Freelance consulting for HOA management companies," Lily read from her notes. "I found your LinkedIn profile. You've been paid to consult on community management for 3 different associations in the past year. That's commercial activity conducted from a residential property. Best not also, your pool has a permit issue," Lily continued cheerfully. "The diving board was installed without proper city approval. I checked with the building department. They have no record of a diving board permit for this address." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "That's impossible." "I filed all the proper paperwork." "You filed HOA paperwork," Lily said. "But diving boards require city structural permits, especially when they're added to existing pools." The city inspector was very helpful when I explained I was doing a school project on municipal compliance. Marcus was staring at his daughter with a mixture of pride and horror. "Lily, what did you do?" "I spent the afternoon learning about public records requests and municipal code enforcement," Lily said innocently. "Turns out there's a lot of information available if you know where to look." Karen's mind was racing. The diving board permits, she was certain she'd handled that properly when she'd had it installed 3 years ago. But looking back, she remembered getting approval from the HOA architectural committee, not the city building department. "This is harassment," she managed. "No," Lily said, pulling out a printed document. "This is a formal complaint filed with the City Code Enforcement Office about unpermitted structural modifications and unlicensed commercial activity. Same thing you've been doing to my dad, just with actual violations instead of made-up ones." Lily Marcus started, but his daughter held up a hand. "Also, I've been talking to your neighbors about the violation notices you handed out today. Turns out people are pretty upset about an elderly widow being harassed over memorial wind chimes." Karen felt panic rising in her chest. "Those were legitimate violations, were they?" Lily pulled out her phone again. "Because I've been reading the HOA bylaws. And most of your violation notices cite rules that don't actually say what you claim they say." She scrolled to a specific screen. "Take the basketball hoop thing. The recreational equipment storage rule says boats and RVs can't be permanently stored in driveways. It doesn't mention basketball hoops, playground equipment, or bicycles. The language is broad enough to encompass the language is specific to large watercraft and recreational vehicles." Lily interrupted. "I called the lawyer who wrote the original bylaws. Nice guy. He confirmed that basketball hoops were never intended to be included." Karen stared at the 16-year-old who was systematically dismantling her afternoon's work with the thoroughness of a seasoned legal researcher. Karen didn't sleep that night. She paced her house like a caged animal, moving from room to room in the dark, her mind cycling through possible responses to Lily Chen's ultimatum. By 3 a.m., she'd drafted and deleted 17 different emails to the HOA board. By 5 a.m., she'd looked up the cost of diving board removal, $8,000, and the penalties for operating an unlicensed home business, up to $10,000 in fines, plus back taxes. By sunrise, she'd made her decision. At exactly 8 a.m., Karen stood on Mrs. Patterson's front porch, holding a formal letter printed on HOA letterhead. Her hands shook slightly as she rang the doorbell. Mrs. Patterson answered, wearing a faded floral robe, her thin white hair uncombed. She looked smaller than Karen remembered, more fragile. "Oh," the elderly woman said, her face falling. "Hello, Karen, Mrs. Patterson. I need to give you this." Karen held out the letter, then pulled it back. "Actually, no. I came to apologize." Mrs. Patterson blinked in confusion. "Apologize? For the violation notice yesterday? For suggesting you remove Harold's wind chimes? For," Karen's voice caught, "for being cruel to a grieving widow over something that brings you comfort?" They stood in silence for a moment, Mrs. Patterson clutching her robe closed against the morning chill. "I don't understand," Mrs. Patterson said finally. "I've been rescinding the violation notice," Karen explained, tearing the letter in half. "The wind chimes can stay. They should stay. Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. Really? And Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. The apology tour took Karen 3 hours. 22 houses, 22 conversations, 22 admissions that she'd been wrong. Some neighbors were gracious, others were openly hostile. The Johnsons slammed the door in her face after she tried to explain about the basketball hoop violation. Janet Johnson's voice was muffled but clear through the door. Too little too late. Karen, we're calling for a vote of no confidence. By the time Karen reached the last house on her list, word had spread through the neighborhood's group text faster than she could walk. Several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, watching her approach like she was a celebrity in a scandal. Frank Davidson was waiting on his front porch, arms crossed, violation notice in his hand. Let me save you some time, he said before Karen could speak. I already know you're rescinding the notices. The question is why? Karen climbed his porch steps, acutely aware of the neighbors watching from the street. Because I was wrong? Wrong about what, specifically? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected anger, maybe some gloating, but not this kind of probing inquiry. Wrong about the violations. Wrong about the enforcement. Wrong about ... She gestured helplessly. Everything. Frank studied her face. What changed your mind? Karen thought about Lily Chen's research, the diving board permit issue, the threat of exposure, and financial ruin. But standing there under Frank's scrutiny, she realized that wasn't really what had changed her mind. Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes, she said quietly. Frank raised an eyebrow. Come again. I sat in my house last night listening to her wind chimes, and I realized I was trying to take away the sound of love. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. Harold hung those chimes for his wife. They're not noise violations. They're the sound of someone being remembered. Something in Frank's expression softened. Karen, are you okay? The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than anger, broke something loose in Karen's chest. Suddenly she was crying on Frank Davidson's front porch while half the neighborhood watched. Tears streaming down her face as months of bottled-up frustration and loneliness poured out. No, she sobbed. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay in a long time. Frank handed her his handkerchief and guided her to his porch swing. Sit down. Tell me what's really going on. Through her tears, Karen found herself talking about the divorce, about Richard's dismissiveness, and the way he'd made her feel like her need for order and structure was somehow pathological. She talked about her job, where she spent her days creating compliance systems for medical devices, ensuring that every procedure was followed precisely because lives depended on it. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, she said, wiping her eyes with Frank's handkerchief. I thought if I could just maintain standards, keep everything organized and beautiful, then everyone would be happy and safe, and ... double quotes, and what? And maybe someone would appreciate that I cared enough to pay attention to the details. Frank was quiet for a long moment. The gathered neighbors had slowly dispersed, apparently realizing this wasn't the public confrontation they'd expected. Karen, Frank said finally, do you know why I moved to Willowbrook Estates? She shook her head. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. I spent 18 months watching her fade away, and then I was alone in a house full of memories. I needed somewhere that felt safe and predictable, somewhere with rules and structure and a community that worked. Karen looked up at him in surprise. You helped create that, Frank continued. Your attention to detail, your commitment to maintaining standards, it created a place where I could heal without chaos. But Karen, somewhere along the way, you started enforcing rules instead of building community. I don't know the difference anymore, Karen admitted. The difference is Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes, Frank said gently. Rules would say they're noise violations. Community would say they're a widow's way of keeping love alive. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun climb higher over the perfectly manicured neighborhood. Going to be a vote of no confidence, Karen said eventually. Probably I'll lose. Probably. Karen nodded, accepting the inevitable. What happens then? Then someone else becomes HOA president, and you figure out what comes next. I don't know what comes next. Frank smiled. That's the thing about X2, don't have to know, you just have to show up. Karen spent the rest of the morning at home, drafting her resignation letter. She wrote 17 different versions before settling on something simple and direct, effective immediately. She was stepping down as HOA president due to personal reasons, and she recommended the board schedule new elections as soon as possible. She was about to email the letter when her doorbell rang. Marcus and Lily Chen stood on her porch, but their expressions were different from the previous evening, less adversarial, more concerned. We heard about your apology tour, Marcus said. How are you doing? The question was so unexpected that Karen almost started crying again. I'm resigning, she said instead. Good, Lily said, then caught her father's sharp look. I mean, that's probably for the best right now. But Dad wanted to tell you something. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I talked to a contractor about your diving board permit issue. Turns out, there was a grandfather clause for diving boards installed before 2019. You're actually in compliance. Karen stared at him, but Lily said there was no permit on file, Marcus clarified. She didn't say you needed one. The distinction matters. Lily looked slightly embarrassed. I may have implied more than I actually knew. I was motivated. You were protecting your father, Karen said. I understand that. Still, it wasn't entirely honest, Marcus said. And we wanted you to know before you made any major decisions based on incorrect information. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Karen asked. Marcus glanced at his daughter, then back at Karen. Because, despite everything, you care about this community. You care too much sometimes, and in the wrong ways, but you care. That matters. And because, Lily added, I did some more research last night. About you, I mean, did you know that property values in Willowbrook Estates have increased 18% since you became HOA president? That's twice the rate of comparable neighborhoods. Karen was stunned. I didn't know that. Also, your complaint about the storm drainage system got the city to install new infrastructure that prevented flooding during that big storm last spring, and your negotiation with the landscaping company saved every homeowner about $300 a year. Lily spent half the night putting together a report, Marcus said. Turns out you've actually done a lot of good as HOA president. You just got lost. In the enforcement side of things, Karen felt something shift inside her chest knot. The tight anxiety she'd been carrying for months, but something looser, more hopeful. That doesn't excuse what I did yesterday, she said, or the way I treated your family. No, it doesn't, Marcus agreed, but it explains why people trusted you with the job in the first place. Lily stepped forward. Ms. Whitmore-Karenkin, I ask you something. Karen nodded. Why did you hate our door so much? The question was so direct, so honest, that Karen found herself answering without thinking. Because it was beautiful, she said. Because it was exactly the kind of thing I would have chosen if I'd had the courage to choose something that made me happy instead of something that was safe. Lily's eyes widened. Really? Navy blue is my favorite color, Karen admitted. I've always loved it. But when I was married, Richard said it was too bold for a front door. Said it would make the house look cheap, so I chose cream instead. And then I convinced myself that cream was more sophisticated.